All right. There's no choice but to bring this energy. I mean, oh my gosh, it's the end of a long couple days, and the fact that you're all here right now, I know that I'm the literal only thing standing between you and a drink, so thank you for being here. Again, my name is Taylor. I'm joined on stage by Mike Graff from Dolby. I'm here with PointFive, and I'm super excited to be up here chatting with you today about Snowflake optimization and the future of cloud efficiency. First, just a quick intro on me. Like I said, my name is Taylor. I almost tripped on a wire. I've been in the FinOps game for just over 5 years now. Over that time, I've been fairly involved in the FinOps Foundation. I was a meetup organizer in the DC area. I was the working group lead for the KPIs working group, and I've been a FinOps Foundation ambassador. And this is actually my third FinOps X. Man, I would have been 4 for 4, but I missed that first one down in Austin, Texas. It was actually on my wedding day. And it was a really big bummer for me because the entire day, all I could think about was FinOps X. Like, oh my gosh, I actually could not pay attention to the real task at hand. I had so much FOMO, and I couldn't focus on anything else. No, that's actually not true. I didn't think about FinOps X all too much that day, but I was bummed to miss it, and that's the truth. But like I said, I've been in FinOps for a little while now, and frankly, a lot has changed in FinOps over the past 5 years. But one thing that has not changed is the reason that I fell in love with it and what got me into this space as a career. And that's this graph behind me right now, right? So what you're looking at is a real daily cost chart from my really early days in FinOps. Actually, wasn't even calling it FinOps at the time. We were calling it cloud cost optimization. And as you can see, we had a pretty sharp decline in our spend, and it was pretty much all from resource optimization, right? And I kind of got into this thing throughout my career of constantly looking for the next optimization opportunity. And once you get past the low-hanging fruit, you know, the idle EC2s and the unattached disks, you kind of get into this place where you're, you know, digging into the long tail of services and deeply understanding their billing models and learning how it works and ingesting and looking deeply at your utilization data. And, you know, all of a sudden you find something and you realize big savings and make a large quantitative impact. And this is what really got me, you know, hooked into FinOps. And I don't know if you relate to this picture. I generated it with ChatGPT. But it almost feels like you're digging for gold, right? And you don't even really know what you're looking for. But when you find it, it's clear, right? And that's what I was trying to depict here. And the example that we're going to be using today to illustrate this is Snowflake, because like I said, you know, there's so many of these optimization opportunities that we all know about. You know, it's been around for a while. Your you know, idle EC2s, your unattached disks, you know, your modernization, your savings plans. But we've had this huge kind of upcoming and precipice of these new usage-based pricing models, new services that are utilizing these, you know, methods of billing, and Snowflake is one of them. And I think that it's important to, you know, dig into these examples and look into ways to optimize and understand their billing models and ensure that you know, you're taking advantage of them and not letting them take advantage of you. So let's go ahead and get into it. The first thing we're going to talk about are Snowflake warehouses, right? This is kind of like the compute equivalent in Snowflake. And these warehouses, they come in varying sizes, you know, extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. And the size of your Snowflake warehouse will roughly correlate with the performance that you get, right? Larger warehouse, faster queries, you can scan more data. But just like in the cloud, you could have an instance where you have a warehouse that's perhaps more powerful than it needs to be, right? And that's when you can get into these strategies to optimize for cost. The first strategy is right sizing. I think we're all going to be familiar with this one. Very, very similar to classic compute right sizing in the cloud. This is the idea of taking a large warehouse and making it smaller, right? And there's a couple instances where doing this might make a lot of sense. One of them is when you have flexible SLAs. What I mean by this is if you have a query and it's not perhaps super important that it runs very, very quickly, right? Maybe you have some flexibility in how long this query can run for, and if extra couple, you know, seconds, minutes, whatever it may be, aren't a huge deal to you, right? If that's the case, you can strongly consider reducing the size of your warehouse. The next is when you're looking at the amount of data that you're scanning with each query, right? These warehouses, they're built to scan a certain amount of data, and the larger warehouse, the more data that you can scan. A lot of times folks will have warehouses that are capable of scanning much more data than they're actually using. So in this case, it's a perfect chance to bring your warehouses down to a smaller size, and there's actually some fairly prescriptive sizing recommendations that you can look at online. So I'm not going to be able to get into that for the sake of time, but I'd recommend you go ahead and look into that. And one last thing just to kind of look out for is queuing, right? Because each of these warehouses, no matter the size, can handle multiple queries that are running concurrently. And if your warehouse is using all of its queries, you're going to build up a queue, right? And this queue are queries that are waiting to run. And if you're looking at your queues over time and you're noticing that there's effectively no queue ever, it's a good indication that you might be able to reduce the size. The next strategy I'm going to go over is warehouse consolidation, and this is actually really important, especially for big enterprises. This is essentially the idea of taking many smaller warehouses and bringing them together and running them into one, right? And this is actually fairly common, especially when you have multiple disparate business units, and each of the business units might have their own warehouse. And a lot of times a team might think that they're doing the right thing because they're running the smallest warehouse possible, but in reality, they're not even coming close to getting the performance out of that warehouse. And in that case, they can bring them together, right? Because the smallest possible warehouse is called an extra small, and it can handle up to 8 concurrent queries, right? So a lot of times folks aren't even using all of that. And as a central team that's overlooking all of this, you can bring them together. And one of the pushbacks that you get on this might be like, hey, I want to be able to allocate costs across these teams. And if that's the case, Snowflake has solved for that with query level cost attribution. So I'd look into that feature and make a determination. The next couple configurations we're going to talk about are all about timing, right? Because in Snowflake, it's a little bit different than in the cloud where you don't have this concept of running 24/7, 365, right? So your warehouse is only going to be running when your queries are executing, right? So what we're going to talk about here is managing the amount of time that your queries are going to have to execute. So the first one is query timeout. This is essentially, hey, how long am I going to let my query run for before I automatically kill it, right? And by default, your query timeout is going to be set to 2 days, right? So that's a lot of time. You can imagine that if you have a developer who's building queries and submitting them and doing large joins or grabbing everything in a table, like my mind goes to imagine someone who's maybe not a SQL expert but is using ChatGPT and just sends it into Snowflake and doesn't even realize what they're doing. All of a sudden this query runs for way longer than was expected and they don't even know to stop it on their own. By default, it's going to go for 2 days, right, before it's automatically stopped. So the strong recommendation from the Snowflake team is to consider bringing this down. I mean, a good rule of thumb is look at 12 hours and perhaps oftentimes even much, much less than that. And there are methods that you can use to override if there are specific teams or queries that you want to run for longer, because a lot of times it does make sense, but as a good rule of thumb, it can make sense to reduce that. Next is your auto suspend. This is essentially saying, hey, once there are no queries running, how quickly am I going to actually deprovision the warehouse? And by default, this is set to 600 seconds, right? So 10 minutes. And again, just think about this into whether you might want to bring this down. The one thing you're going to want to consider is that when the warehouse deprovisions, you do lose your cache, right? So if you need to maintain that cache, you're going to maybe perhaps want a longer auto suspend, but it's a good configuration to be aware of. Last one we're really going to get into here is inactive storage, right? So in Snowflake, you have this concept of a table, right? And you're running queries against that table. And that table can be changing over time, right? And you can take snapshots of this table in order to be able to look back at your data over periods of time and do something that's called time travel, right? And similar to in AWS or in the native cloud providers, your snapshots are built incrementally. And what that means is that if you're taking a snapshot every single day, you can imagine that if there's no data change and you're taking the snapshot of the same data on day 1 and day 2, there's no incremental charge, right? You're just billed for the original table snapshot. However, if you have an active table or one that there's a lot of churn in, if you're taking frequent snapshots, the amount of total snapshot storage you're going to be storing can explode, right? And that's what you get into a case like you see up here, where you can have up to 100 terabytes of snapshots on a 1 terabyte table. And I've heard stories of up to 250 terabytes of snapshots on a 1 terabyte table. So this can get really out of hand. So you're going to want to make sure you're thinking about, if you have active tables, what's the optimal snapshot strategy to have in place. I'm going to have to go really quick over this one just for the sake of time. We don't have all that much time today, but this is just basic SQL best practices. Like I said, you're billed when your queries are running, so you just want to make sure that you're writing efficient SQL. Minimize the data you're scanning. Don't do unnecessary joins. Use clustering and partitioning, right? And limit row counts in dev and test. Now, I hope that these Snowflake examples are useful for you, and you can bring them back into your organization and put them in place and optimize your spend. But the reality is that this isn't just about Snowflake, right? This is about everything. All of these different cloud providers and data platforms, they're all using these usage-based pricing models, and things frankly get quite complex. And I think that when people think about usage optimization, right, making changes to their resources to optimize for cost, their mind goes to these few examples that are highly prevalent and we all know about, right? Again, they go to their idle EC2s. They go to their unattached disks. Let's go GP2 to GP3. I don't know why that's half red. But That's funny. But essentially, now it's 2025 and we've known about these couple examples for, quite a while now. And there's a ton of savings to be realized by those, completely valid, right? We're talking about like the trusted advisors type stuff, and you should be aware of it. But the reality is, especially if you're running a more mature FinOps practice, most of the mass, right? Most of the waste, the inefficiency is under the surface, so to speak, right? It's like in this long tail of services that have these unique pricing models that you have to really dive deep into to deeply understand and look at your usage patterns and make determinations as to how to optimize them. And this is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about throughout my career, right? And actually, over the past few months, I've been working on a project. Many of you might know about this. A couple of you in this room are contributors. We've been building this thing, we're calling it the Cloud Efficiency Hub. And what this is the world's most comprehensive library of cloud cost inefficiencies, right? And this is about tackling the long tail of cost inefficiencies that are in the cloud. You can go into it, you can filter by your cloud provider, you can drill into the focus categories, compute, storage, networking, database, other, and find some inefficiencies that could be prevalent within your cloud environment. And my call to action is for you to check it out. You can find it at hub.pointfive.co, and I'd love for you to take a look, give us feedback, see if it's useful to you. And the big call to action is find something that we don't have and contribute it, because we have a research team that's doing work every single day to find inefficiencies, and we're trying to give back to the community by letting them find it themselves. And there's way, way more stuff out there that people have encountered in their day jobs. You might use a service that you're doing innovative things and finding these inefficiencies, and someone else might be using the same service and not be aware of the findings that you've had. So I'd encourage you to give back to the community. That's one of the special things about FinOps, and contribute to the hub. This is just an example of what something might look like in the hub. As you can see, there's a fairly complex level of detail in terms of how to think about what an inefficiency is, how to remediate it, how to detect it. And again, I would just encourage you to check it out and see if it's useful for you. But the reality is that this hub, it's not enough, right? It's one thing to know about inefficiencies. It's one thing to dive deep into the billing models and understand them, but it's another thing to apply them across your entire infrastructure and your entire ecosystem and your entire environment, right? And we've been thinking a lot about this, and we think that there's space in FinOps for a new discipline, which is thinking about how do you manage your efficiency at scale. And we're calling this cloud efficiency posture management. And it's a fairly basic concept, to be honest. It's about answering the question, how efficient am I, right? And in security, cloud security, there's this concept of your cloud security posture. And I'm not a security guy. We've got a lot of people that work for us that are, so please apologize if I botched this. But essentially, your cloud security posture is trying to answer the question, right? How secure is my application? Based on how protected it is against known vulnerabilities, right? You can think of your cloud efficiency posture as how efficient am I based on how well I've architected and built my application to be protected against known inefficiencies, right? And managing this and finding your inefficiencies at scale is what PointFive, the product, is built to do. I don't want to be the one to tell you all that much about it. So instead, I'd like to introduce Mike Graff from Dolby to tell you a bit about how he's used PointFive to improve security posture at Dolby.
It's treacherous right there. Thanks, Taylor. It's great to be here with you on this presentation. Thanks for having me. And it's also really wonderful that I've been able to fulfill my lifelong ambition of being introduced by Joe. So thank you, Joe, for making that a reality. I really am happy about that. So I'm Mike Graff. I'm Infrastructure Architecture Director at Dolby Laboratories. If you don't know what Dolby does, we are an entertainment technology company. We're focused on improving the sound and sight of your entertainment on whatever device you choose to consume it. And I'm going to share a little bit about our journey with PointFive and the types of efficiencies we've achieved. There's lots of areas where we've been able to leverage the tool. We got that red thing again. And I'm going to focus kind of on 4 key service areas where we've seen some significant efficiency improvements. It's going to be S3, EKS, DynamoDB, and CloudWatch. So let's jump into it. So S3, everybody knows that's a big area where you tend to see a lot of waste. You have a lot of opportunities for savings. And PointFive has helped us to kind of identify some of the more obscure savings opportunities beyond just like deleting a bucket, right? So the first one I'll call out is this notion of taking advantage of intelligent tiering or lifecycle policies. for your buckets, right? You may have a lot of stuff in that bucket that isn't necessarily, needs to be in standard tier. And the thing I love about the tool that it does for us is it doesn't just tell us about it, it actually shows us what it's going to cost to move that data into the different tier and how quickly we're going to get a return on investment for making that change, which is, I think, pretty unique. In addition, it flags for us, maybe you've got buckets configured for intelligent tiering when you shouldn't, right? If you've got a lot of very small objects in the bucket, you may or may not know that intelligent tiering doesn't work on objects below 128K. So having the tool to identify for us those buckets where we've got that configured and maybe we shouldn't have it configured has been really helpful. And lastly, you might have buckets that have a lot of internet egress going on where you don't have CloudFront in place. And PointFive will identify that for you and let you know that, hey, you could put CloudFront here and save on your request and transfer costs and take advantage of the caching that you get from CloudFront. So that's S3. Let's talk about EKS a little bit. So for us, I think one of the biggest headaches about EKS is kind of keeping track of outdated clusters, right? Once you get below a certain supported version, then you start getting those lovely extended support charges from our friends at AWS. So keeping track of that can be a real headache if you've got hundreds of accounts and thousands of clusters. So this is an area where PointFive is flagging those for us, letting us know that, hey, you're paying extended support charges on these clusters. Maybe you should take an action. In addition, it's showing us like dev clusters, clusters that we've identified as development clusters, but that are using on-demand capacity. Maybe we could be using Spot instead, or a mix of Spot and on-demand. So it's identifying that for us and letting us know where we could potentially be more efficient in our usage of EKS. Jumping over to DynamoDB. So DynamoD, super popular, but it's very often that you might have tables that don't necessarily have a lot of activity, and you may have over-provisioned read capacity, over-provisioned write capacity, and you may not know about it, right? So PointFive is identifying those for us, letting us know where we have tables that are kind of low activity, and we can make some changes to save some money. And in addition, you might be able to move that table to a lower storage tier and just be more efficient with your usage of DynamoDB as well. Lastly, CloudWatch. So this is kind of like the, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, who cares, right? So if you've got CloudWatch set up and no one's sending any data to the CloudWatch log group, or no one's actually subscribed to the log group, why do you have it, right? So PointFive will find those for you and identify, hey, you've got a log group out there that is basically doing nothing. So if I could just kind of sum up for us the benefit, when you think of these kind of deeper waste things that you're going after, a lot of times it's kind of like the death by 1,000 cuts, right? It may be only $15, $20 in an account here and $15, $20 in an account here, but if you have hundreds or thousands of accounts, it can really add up to significant savings opportunity, and that's an area where PointFive, I think, has excelled for us, is kind of grouping those and making those complex optimizations easier to see. So I'm going to wrap it up and say thank you very much for attending, hand it over to Taylor to finish this off.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike. I really hope that everyone here got something actionable that you can take away and employ in your environment. I do want to give a quick shout out to Samar Arora. He's sitting here with us from the Snowflake team. He helped us put together a lot of the content that you saw in here. He really knows his stuff when it comes to Snowflake cost optimization, he and his team. So if you have any questions on that, please feel free to come up to me, come up to Samar, anything on PointFive. Again, we have a team that's here to answer any questions you have about finding these deep inefficiencies within your cloud environment. Mike Graff, thank you so much for joining us. Another thing, just so you're all aware, this is recorded, so you can find it online at any time. So thank you very much, and we'll have a QR code for you to leave feedback and connect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
And I have 50 seconds left. Can I have one more thing? Again, the Cloud Efficiency Hub, it is actually a really awesome resource. We've gotten a ton of positive feedback about it this week. So please check it out, hub.pointfive.co. We're going to be posting about it online. You'll see it about it a little bit. And again, I really encourage you to look, use it within your organization, find savings, and if there's anything we don't have that you've seen in your own work, please contribute. Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, producer Andrew here. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. For more FinOps X 2025 content, go check out our YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and leave comments and questions for all of our wonderful speakers. We appreciate your support.